I'm Lars. Hello. I do a bunch of HoloLens stuff, and I was kind of handed this saying, hey, do something that we haven't really seen. So there's a bunch of little bits that if you are interested in HoloLens development, these are probably really cool tools that you can use, and I would say should use, but that's up to you. So just to show of hands, who here were yesterday at Rocky's session? Okay, cool. So I'm guessing the rest that wasn't are somehow familiar with HoloLens development already. Is that fair? Has anyone never developed anything for HoloLens? Okay, few hands. All right, okay, cool. No, that's all right. Because Rocky went through all of the basics yesterday, right? So that's, I'll just do a quick overview, but if you if you're complete new beginner, maybe go and watch his session as well when it comes online. So there's the agenda, just so you know what's coming. I'm going to do just a quick overview, just so we know what Rocky kind of went through yesterday, but it will be quite fast and not in a lot of detail. I'm going to go through something called the Holo Toolkit, which is amazing. We look at some of the more advanced gestures that you can use, because yesterday, as you'll see, was only one. Then we have voice commands, and I'll talk about why voice commands are not that simple. Spatial audio, spatial mapping. We'll look a lot more in detail about spatial mapping, because that is the key for HoloLens and why it works the way it does. And then something around testing, because as developers, we love testing, right? Yes. Oh, right. And please ask questions throughout. I don't mind if you raise your hand. If I don't know, I'll say I don't know. But I wanted this to be more of an interactive session, because those of you that were there yesterday, you might have questions based on what you saw yesterday at Rocky's session. So, quick overview of this amazing device. And yes, just so you know, I did bring one. Hooray. And I will do one, maybe two demos with it. We're not going to do any particular magic with it, because this session is more about how you develop for it and the tooling. And that's mesmerizing, isn't it? You just go, ooh. Does anyone know what the hardware is for this thing? Have you read about the hardware at all? It's actually not that impressive hardware-wise. It's got like 2 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of memory. It's got a standard Intel Atom processor, or system on chip. But it does have this HPU, which I'll see if I can point out about there somewhere, which is a holographic processing unit, right? So that's what does all the holograms, and apparently it's something like 1 trillion calculations a second, I've been told, but not sure if that's correct. Yes?
Rocky mentioned yesterday that the neural networking to understand gestures was built into the HPU.
Right.
So how do you update the HPU? Is there some firmware aspect to it?
So the question is, how do you update the HPU, because it does a lot of neural networking stuff as well for managing gestures? I don't know. I would imagine it would come as part of the firmware update. This is a preview unit, so it runs essentially Windows 10 inside it. So you do get updates frequently, every month maybe or something. Okay, so this is what Rocky went through yesterday, and I'll just do 5 minutes on what this is. So there's gaze, which is essentially your mouse cursor, right? Gaze is where your head is pointing, not your eyes. So your head. So you're pointing at something. That's why you see people do this a lot, because they're looking around to try and focus on, or not focus, but point at things. And you get this little dot in front of you, which is essentially your mouse cursor. Gaze is the first of 3 ways of input for the HoloLens. Gestures, and yesterday I would have thought Rocky just mentioned tap. So that's this gesture, tap. There are others we'll look at later, but there's also bloom, which is that gesture, which essentially just means exit your app, or if you've already exited, put up the start menu. And that is like an override. You can never ever, as a developer, override this gesture. That'll always work. It's like a fail-safe. There are other gestures we'll look at in a minute as well. Voice, so that's voice commands. The voice recognition system on this thing is incredible. It is really, really good. It's very accurate. It's very fast. So if you play with the emulator, which we'll look at as well, there are some delays that comes just because you have to use your laptop mic and it goes in and it has to be passed to the emulator and so on and so on. If you use a genuine and physical device, it's really, really quick. So don't let that fool you if we get to that and it shows a little bit laggy. It does work offline as well, the voice recognition, but it also uses some Azure magic if you are connected online. Sound. This is in particular spatial sound, so sound that's attached to an element in your 3D world. And we won't go too much into the sound. We'll talk a little bit about it, but it's really important that you understand how sound design works, because it's really easy to attach sounds to everything, and then what you hear is everything, right? It just becomes one big pile of noise. There are some really cool stuff built in that makes your job a little bit easier. And then, of course, you have spatial mapping. And I found this image, so we can only use images that are copyright free. And this happens to be from my hometown of Copenhagen in this tower that has a round staircase, or not staircase. Anyway, I thought that was a nice trivia. No, yeah, right, geez. But spatial mapping, I'll show you on the device. There are 4 cameras that sit up the top here. So there's 2 on either side, 1, 2, and 3, 4. And they're kind of like a Kinect, right? So they work a little bit like a Kinect in terms of mapping the room and figuring out where things are in 3D. And they're really quite, should we say accurate? Maybe not, because it's a polygon count issue. The more accurate it is, the more processing power you need. But this essentially scans your room at certain intervals. So a lot of questions comes up, hey, what happens if someone walks in front of your hologram? Well, when it rescans that bit, when you can force it to do that, yes, the hologram will hide behind whatever it is, but it's not 100% live. And that's one of the not drawbacks, but one of the things that you need to consider when developing apps for it, right? There's also a depth camera that sits in the middle here that measures depth. The range on the spatial mapping is about 5 meters. So you can't just stand here and map a whole room. You have to walk around and map the room, right? But we'll do that in a minute. Not in a minute, but later. All right. So, Holo Toolkit. Has anyone heard of the Holo Toolkit? A few people. Okay. Yeah, cool. This is your friend. If you start developing anything on HoloLens, this is really quite almost a necessity just to keep you sane. It's on GitHub, and it's done by Microsoft, but it's also maintained via pull request by the community. So there's lots of people. We'll get to how you can get involved later. But there's lots of community involvement in this. And this came from a game, well, kind of like a prototype projects that were built by a French company. I can't remember the name now. But they built a game called Fragments. And if you get a chance to play Fragments, it is the best example I've seen of mixed reality. So does anyone know what I mean by mixed reality? Have you kind of got that? Yeah, there's a few nods. Anyone want me to explain what mixed reality is? Because it's important in this context. Okay, cool. So the best mixed reality is Fragments that I've seen. So characters interacting with your furniture, sitting on it, coming up, talking, standing next to you, next to a bed, whatever. I've used this in tiny hotel rooms where there was almost just a bed and it still worked. It's really quite impressive. But from this and from Young Conquer, which is a game where this foxy dude jumps around on your furniture to collect coins and you control him, which is really weird when you first do it. This company in France had to find a way to identify what's a couch? How can you sit down? How do you know it's a chair? How do you know where the floor is? How do you know where the ceiling is? So all of those things are built in, and you can use the scripts. It's essentially a large array of scripts that you can attach to things and identify things from it. The same with Young Congo. You need to figure out, can I walk under a table? Can I go behind the couch? Things that are important in the context of mixed reality become much easier with this. But there's also other things. There's a little screenshot. I don't know if you can see it. It should be big enough. But essentially, when you install, it's just a Unity package. I'll show you in a minute how you do it. It's really quite simple. You get this project setup stuff. So there's a lot of little features you need to make sure are right when you create a new Unity project. It's almost like a click of a button with this. Setting the background to black, making sure the camera is centered at origin. All those things that are important to get a real good experience and actually start on the right foot, they come out of the Holo Toolkit for free. A lot of spatial mapping, like we just talked about, those features. There's sharing. So you can share experiences on HoloLens, which requires a separate server. And I think you can connect up to about 16 devices. I haven't personally tried it because I only have one. But if you have multiple devices, you can share experiences. And as far as I know, it works really well. Scripts galore. Lots and lots and lots of scripts. And I'll show you a couple of them in a minute. And all of this you get for free. And it really does take a lot of the grunt and hassle out of starting a new project. So let's have a look, see how that works. Okay. Ooh, what happened here? Oh. Okay. So I've got to switch to 6. Maybe. Hey, here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to start up Unity. Connecting. We'll go offline. I'll just create a brand new Unity project. We don't have to, we can call it MSAU Ignite. And that's, screen, really? This is, don't touch it. This is the beauty of USB-C to HDMI. Okay. Have we got a backup? Is the sound going? Okay. I worked a treat on Tuesday, so I'm just going to try and soldier on. We'll just create a project here. So I'm just creating a brand new blank Unity project. It's not a HoloLens project. It's not special in any way. It's just completely blank like you would see any other new Unity project. All I have to do now is go to File, Edit, Assets, Import Package, Custom Package. And then I put this on my desktop conveniently. HoloToolkit.Unity package. I'll show you how to get that in a minute as well. And while this imports, it just kind of, if you're not familiar with Unity, I didn't touch it. A Unity package is, so if I walk over there, okay. So it gives you this little dialogue of what is in this package. A Unity package is almost like a zip file, and it contains lots of stuff. It can be prefabs, can be assets, can be models, can be all sorts, right? The examples you don't need to import. And to be fair, most of them usually don't work. I'm really not touching it. It's just, there we go. Click import, and it imports this package. What should happen now, if everything works, is that you get an extra menu item up here once this is on. This is going to be interesting, isn't it? Hopefully no one has epilepsy. Yeah, we'll soon, exactly. I think I need a new dongle. And this package, once it comes up, I have professionals looking at it. There we go. Oh, it's taking a little bit longer than usually. But it gives you all the menu options that I showed before, right? So in a minute, hopefully, we can then just go and say, hey, make my project HoloLens compliant, essentially. And it'll go into the player, and it'll set the virtual reality SDK, set it to Windows holographic. It'll set the background as black. It'll censor the origin of the camera, the main camera. It'll give you a ton of scripts that'll be imported as assets. Wow, this is demo 101, isn't it? Jeez. No, it's a micro. No, it's a USB-C. That's a good thing about standards. There's so many to choose from. Wow. Okay. This is normally a lot quicker. I will show you where to get it, though, while we're waiting for this. So in here, there's a good friend of mine, Jimmy, in Sweden. He has, just go to HoloToolkit.AzureWebsites.net. It's reasonably easy to remember. And he does all the hard work for you. He takes the GitHub repo, and whenever there's a new push to it and there's a new update, it automatically rebuilt this, and it puts it all into a Unity package for you. So you just click on that link, and it downloads that Unity package, which is about 40 meg, I think. It's not huge. And then, there we go, look at that. So now I have a menu up here, Holo Toolkit. So I'll just show you if I click on the main camera. See over here on the right, it's a bit, I can't make it any bigger, unfortunately. The background is this sky color. The position is a meter in front of you. By the way, all units in Unity are meters. So where you see up here, all of these are meters, which makes it really easy to figure out where things are in your experience. But if I go up here in the Holo Toolkit and I say Configure, Apply HoloLens Scene Settings, so it does move camera to origin, camera clears to black, update near clipping plane, update field of view. And you apply that, plop, it just does it, right? And normally you would have to do this manually every single time you create a new project. And just for that, for those 2 minutes of downloading and installing, it's really worth it. Configuring, you can do project settings, which are when you export it from Unity to Windows, to Visual Studio as a Windows 10 project, there's a bunch of stuff you need to set as well so that it exports it correctly. This will do all that for you as well. So just for those little things here, it's worth it, 100%. So we'll reload it. But the main thing is the spatial mapping for me. Now, we won't look at that just now because there's just a million scripts, but there's a demo as well that you can use that identifies couches as basically a flat surface with a vertical surface behind it, and chairs the same way, and it can figure out where walls are and everything. All right. 5, is it? There we go. Okay, cool. So any questions on the Holo Toolkit just before I move on? Oh, yes, go on. 5.5 point whatever the current build is. There is some really cool features in 5.5 that are, and all the examples that are on the Microsoft website are also built for 5.5. I have these, by the way. Yes? Have you got a question? But these are for tomorrow, Friday at 12, 12:20, 12:40. So I can give these out if I feel so inclined. Not that I'm not going to force you to. Yeah, I am actually. I'm going to force you to ask questions. Please, if you do get one, the time on it is non-negotiable, I've been told. If you're late, you miss out. That you can try and swap it with someone else, maybe, but you can't change the time that's on that card. It's just how it is. Now, are there any questions? Is Unity the only development platform for HoloLens? Yes and no. You don't have to use Unity, but you make your life a lot harder if you don't. Because of all the integration stuff that's been built into it now in the latest version, it's kind of really difficult not to use Unity. But you can. Some people are using Blender, which is mainly, I thought, a modeling tool. I haven't used Blender. Maya as well. There's an integration point there somewhere. But I'm by no means a 3D modeler. I'm a programmer, right? So, anyone else? No? All right. So gestures. Yesterday, Rocky would have told you about the tap gesture, which is just holding up, kind of like the back of your hand towards you, and put up your finger, and you just tap like that, right? And that's all it is. Tap, tap, tap. Luckily, they have provided you with a clicker with the HoloLens, because you get pretty sick of doing tap, 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 tap on everything. But that's essentially your mouse button that clicks. Now, there are other gestures as well. So hold is one. We'll look at that in a minute. We'll look at the code for these as well, but we'll do a demo of the hold. Tap is essentially, there's a ready and a press state of the tap. And if you don't go back to ready, that's a hold, right? So you just sort of hold it. And when you hold things, you can capture that event. The framework will pick it up for you. Then you have manipulation, which is moving things, for lack of a better term. We'll do that as well in the emulator with this dude, Mr. Astroman. And manipulation is hold and then move your hand. So it picks up whether it's vertical axis or horizontal axis, and you kind of get locked into one of these two axes when you start moving your hand. So that's the manipulation. And then you have navigation, which is in 3D space. Kind of like having a joystick, good old Amiga 500 days, shows my age. but you can navigate in 3D space as well. So that could be for moving things around the room, pick them up with hold, and then navigate to put them somewhere. The manipulation is often used just to, for sound or moving of things in one plane, where the navigation is more of a 3D action. All right. So I'll soldier on here. Go back to 6. Still working. Is that big enough? Can you see that all right? Or do you want me to make that font bigger? It's okay? Just down the back as well? Just make sure you can see it. So these are script files that come as part of the AstroMan tutorial. All of this is on the Microsoft Developer Portal for HoloLens. All of these examples. There's some that are called origami, which Rocky used yesterday, which is like the entry level. And then there's AstroMan, which is more in-depth, such as having more gestures and more voice design cues and stuff like that. In this case, I'll just make sure I got my notes here. So this is the Hands Manager script. Now scripts you can call whatever you want, obviously, just like normal. And you attach scripts in Unity to objects, and that's how they get triggered when something happens to that object. So in here we have what's called an interaction manager, which is that dude there. And that can tell if you have something interacting with the element that this is attached to. Right, so in this case, it's going to be the cursor. So this script is attached to the AstroMan, and when the cursor interacts with the AstroMan, this fires and says, hey, something is trying to interact with you, and you can capture that. So it's two-way. You can force things on stuff that you're looking at or tapping on or whatever you're doing, but you... Jeez, it's temperamental. But you can also catch if something is trying to interact with you. And when we do, if I go down here, press F12, we just have this hand detected true. And what that does is that there's a little 3D element. I'll show you this in a minute, maybe. Oh, is that what it is? I'll just put my hands here. And what happens is that you then get this interaction point that displays a visual cue that something is trying to interact with the AstroMan. Now I am going to go through this a little bit quick because we don't have that much time. But if you do have questions, please do ask, if you could see the screen. Gesture Manager. In here we have all of the different gestures. So you hook them up just like any other... Whoop, look at the size of the thing. Any other events you would normally in C#. Wow, that's annoying. I do apologize. That was not intended. So for the tap event, you attach an event handler just like you would any other C# project, right? There's nothing magic about it. What you do have is you have all these different navigation events in this case. So started, updated, completed, and cancelled. We're going to try and duct tape the hell out of this thing. Yes, sir.
Completely beside the point, but while he's monkeying around,
Yeah.
do you know what the resolution is of the scanning of the room? Like to be able to, like, is it down to a centimetre or 3 centimetres?
So the question is, what's the resolution of the scanning of the room? You mean the spatial mapping? Yeah. It's kind of a polygon count issue more than a measuring unit. No, not if it's a smaller room, but it's just if you have, it doesn't pick up all the detail. You can, in your app, you can kind of dial up and down the polygon count, but that affects performance, battery life, all this sort. So you've got to find the right balance for your app. I tried doing it with a toy car because I was doing this workshop, this brainstorming session around cars and how to use HoloLens for repairing them. It didn't pick up a toy car as other than just kind of a blob if it was on the table. But it'll pick up chairs, and as I'll show you with the spatial mapping, you get an idea of it. That's the demo I will do.
One of my clients builds lifts.
Yep.
And lift shafts, and they have problems with sometimes they're not built to spec. So would this be something that they could go in there and scan and see whether it was within spec to...
So the question again is, say for an elevator lift shaft, would it be accurate enough to find faults in measurements, I guess? Yeah. I wouldn't rely on it. That's just a little bit too accurate maybe. I had another question on Tuesday. How about railroad tracks? Can you scan the tracks and see where it's bent? You know, yeah, but the problem is that it's 5 meters distance, so you got to walk the whole bloody thing, right? You could put it in front of the train and scan that. So it's, yeah, I wouldn't rely on it for millimeter precision. Definitely not. That's a good question, though. That doesn't mean you can't ask more questions.
Okay. Deal. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, so we have all these events here. We've now been duct taped and doesn't seem to do much difference, but oh well, it's a bit temperamental. eBay. So we have all the navigation events, and then we also have the manipulation events, and that's all you have to do to hook them up, right? There really is not more to it. The framework will fire the events. The framework will take care of calling your event handlers, all of that. There's just that bit is done for you. Okay, so let's just go to one of them. Let's go to the navigation here. So if we've already started it, I'll press F12. So what this does with navigation, and we'll see this in the emulator in a minute, is that when I start navigating, so I tap and hold on the Astroman, I navigate left to right, it'll actually update the position. Navigated position equal relative position. So that's where my hand is. It'll turn towards that point. It's a little bit more to it, but that's kind of the gist of it. And it's the same here. If you stop navigating, you said navigating to faults and so on. Does this convey how relatively simple this is? Because it hopefully does. There's done a lot of work on trying to abstract all of the hard stuff from actually mapping 3D space and interacting with it to just having this. That's also, I often get the question, can you build your own gestures? Yes, but why would you? Because you have to then manipulate raw data and identify what a gesture is. So that's one problem. You have to do that accurately every time. But even more important to me is the user experience. How do users know that there's another gesture? How do they know to use that gesture if they're always used to having tap and hold and manipulate? So yes, you can do your own gesture. And in some cases, I'm sure it'll make sense, having like a swipe maybe or something. And I'm sure there'll be more coming in the future for the device as well. But unless you really, really need it or want to, I wouldn't start fiddling with it because it's hard. It's really difficult. Okay, let's have a look at Astroman. Let's see how this shows up. So that is the HoloLens emulator. Here's Astroman. Oh, he'll be there in a second. Just went out. So here's Astroman. And this is all freely available on the Microsoft portal. You can download all the assets and go through the tutorial and build this guy yourself. There we go. So if I now just press the arrow keys in WASD, if you're a gamer, you'll know that well, I can manipulate in 3D space, right? So I can move around just like if I was on the real device. So you don't need a HoloLens device to develop HoloLens apps, although I would use it on one before I release it to the wild. But the emulator is actually really, really good. We'll get more back to the emulator in a minute. So in this case, I have, see the cursor there? It's just like a starburst or something right in the middle there. As soon as I hit the Astroman, it changes. It's a little bit tricky to see, but there we go. Well, like that. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a circle with a left and right arrow. Right, so the cursor changes based on my gestures. So that's a gesture hint that says, hey, this is what's available. So if I now press the Enter key on it, that becomes a hold. You see there's a finger now that points and says, hey, you're holding. If I then move left or right, I'll actually swivel and turn him, right? So the more I move, the faster he goes. Whee! And then we have vomit and helmet. So that's as simple as that. There's a little bit of calculation in the speed he's turning, depending on how far you've dragged it in your manipulation. But it's really not that difficult. When you go through origami, the 100 level tutorial, and then do this, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's a bit of math and a bit of scripting, and that's it. The hard thing for a developer, I'm assuming, is most people here developers? Yeah? Any designers, 3D modelers, any of those? Okay, cool. So you have a distinct advantage, sir. because if you understand 3D space, 3D modeling, this becomes a lot easier. But that's the hardest part for me as a developer, is trying to figure out what the hell this 3D stuff is. It's not the scripting, it's not the event handling, it's not the framework. Okay, so that was gestures. Oh yeah, I'll just see if this works. So this is, again, microphone on my laptop going into the emulator. So we'll see if it works. It says, expand model. Hey, it did work. So that was a voice command, and we'll get to voice commands in a minute. But I can now go and find these pieces, and I can now manipulate them in 3D, navigate by moving them around. Hang on. Oh, sorry. Move astronaut. Hey, I don't know if you saw it. Did you see the cursor change? Yeah, so now I have up and down as well. So I'm now in navigation mode. And again, if I hit enter and I move things around, I can now, if it'll work, come on. All right, I'm meant to be able to move them. That didn't work there for some reason. So those are the 3 extra gestures you get. So you got tap, but you also get hold, manipulate, and navigate. Any questions on gestures?
How do you differentiate between voice commands and conversation?
How do you differentiate between voice commands and conversation? That's a good question, because the HoloLens will listen at all times, right? But it'll be in context to what you're running, the app you're running. So if you have a voice command that happens to be part of a sentence that you say, you could trigger that voice command, for sure. But generally, you kind of say it as an atomic thing. But we'll get to voice commands now, actually. Okay. Whee, look at that. That was kind of my fantastic segue. So voice commands are, again, not hard to implement. I don't know if Rocky showed any yesterday. Any people that were there? Did he show how to do voice commands? How to implement them? Yes. Sorry? No? Oh, no? 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 Okay. He did share some of the code. Okay. But you essentially have a keyword recognizer that you feed keywords into, and then it'll recognize that keyword and raise whatever event you've attached to that. That could be, usually it's an anonymous event that you'll just, like a Lambda function or something, that'll do something. It really is quite basic. Now, the design of voice commands is much trickier, which is why it's in this session, not yesterday. Implementation is easy. Here's an astronaut. Figuring out how to interact via voice it sounds really easy, because say I built this demo for another talk, and I have just some blocks and you shoot balls at them, right? And it would be really easy to just say shoot, and then the ball would fly. But that's not very good voice design, because shoot is very short. So how do you know I'm not saying shoot short? You know, there's a little tiny differences that make a big difference. If you have a phrase, 2 or 3 words, then it's much easier to get context for the voice recognition system. And it's much easier for people to remember as well, believe it or not. So speech design. These are all the points that you need to consider before you implement your voice commands, especially if you wanted the user to use them, because part of it is getting users to actually use the voice commands as well. So what actions can be taken through speech? Why would you want to have something done through speech and particular action? What's the benefit? This could be that you skip 3 or 4 taps or steps, for sure. That would be a good idea. Is speech for accessibility? Absolutely, yeah. You know, not all people have hands, you could say. So for sure, or people in wheelchairs or whatever it might be, there's accessibility.
I guess you could use it for while you're holding and manipulating, you can then add additional commands.
Yep.
While you're already
So the comment on if you're manipulating something, you could have voice commands to enhance whatever that experience is that you're doing when you're manipulating it. So you can combine them. You could certainly do that. You know, detect when I do this action, am I manipulating or not, with some flag that you said. So is it a good option for completing a task? Because sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's too hard doing with voice. filling out that's not a good example, but something that requires more precision maybe than just a task being done. Like if it's from this point to that point, if you're drawing a square on the floor, it's kind of hard to do with voice commands because you don't know what you exactly want. How does a user know when speech input is available? This is a really tricky one because how do you educate your users, right? How do users know that you can say this command? It's really not simple because there's lots of examples just in phone apps. I don't know if you've built mobile native apps or mobile web apps. How do you educate users? How do you tell them that this thing's available, this feature, or this, in this case, voice command? You can build a wizard into it. You can do it with, if you haven't used the command before, if you get to a point, you can kind of pop it up, but you need to somehow educate your users and tell them, hey, did you know? You can use this voice command. Is the app always listening? Because by default it is. And that comes back to the question you had before. What if I don't want it to intercept the voice commands in a particular scenario? Well, you need to cater for that. You need to make sure that your code doesn't pick up the voice command then, or ignore it, or whatever it is. What phrases initiate an action or behavior? That's what I was talking about before. Instead of saying shoot, say shoot ball. Or instead of saying reset, say reset world, which are examples that Microsoft uses as well. Because if you have 2 or 3 words, the chances of having a better recognition is much higher. Yes? Sorry, I can't hear.
Say, for example, you picked up a pipe in 3D and you want to magnify it.
Uh-huh.
Wouldn't that sort of, the context that you have picked up the pipe, then the single word magnify would make sense?
Yeah, so the question is like, if you had a pipe, say a virtual pipe, 3D pipe, and you pick it up and you want to enhance it or manipulate it in some way, wouldn't a word like magnify be okay? It probably would, because it's longer. It's not 1 syllable. It's magnify. It's 3 syllables, which makes it easier. So yeah, sure, there's always exceptions to the rule. But just as long as you're aware of it, which you are now, saying, hey, I think this is okay, and you test it and whatnot, then you'd probably be all right. But if you just went, Zoom, you didn't kind of... Sorry? There's no context, that's right. So that's I'm just trying to put in your head that you got to think about these things. Interaction dialogue, because sometimes context, as you said, is important. So what if I just set this voice command, are there a new set of commands that are only available when that has been said? Like, can you actually have a conversation, a dialogue going with the app that makes sense in a certain scenario? It could be, for example, that you've just created a square or a box, you're drawing a box. It's a great example, isn't it? And then you say create box, and you say make it blue. Right? But make it blue would not make sense if you hadn't already had the object to make blue. So there might be a dialogue that happens based on what the first voice command is. Yes? Uh-huh. Good question. I'm going to give you a card for that because I think that's very poignant. Are there voice commands that can't be overridden, just like we had the bloom gesture? Yes, absolutely. So there's something called, there's 2, really. There's see it, say it. So if you have a button with a label that does something, if you are in that experience and you can see that button, you can say the label on it. And that will always trigger that label or whatever it does. So, for example, if you have a window, a 2D window like the settings app, you can just say remove, and it'll remove the app because you can see it. The other one is select. Instead of tap, you can say select. You can always say select. So yeah, there are at least 2 that I can think of. And then one that I always come across is network connectivity required. Because what if you have voice commands that require some sort of, say, an Azure or cloud computation, but you don't have network connectivity? So what happens? And this always catches people out, because when you develop for it, of course you got Wi-Fi. Of course you do. So that's as valid for every other object or every other development scenario, just not just this one.
So those reserved words, do you still have to wire up the voice recognition in the project, or does those ones come along for a free ride every time you have a new project?
So the reserved word that I was just talking about Do they come for free, or do you have to actually wire them up, is the question. They come for free. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about them. As in, you can't override them either. So, yeah, but that's a good question. All right, I was going to do this, but...
One super quick one.
Yeah.
Is it possible to prevent drive-by commands? So the user is only authorized to initiate commands.
I like this. Is there an option to prevent drive-by commands? So if someone goes, shoot ball, and runs off? Yeah. Not really. Not really. I'm going to use that, drive-by commands. That's amazing.
The voice cancelling microphone, the noise cancelling features of the microphone mitigates that to a certain degree.
It does. And it is one of the issues with voice commands is that if you get too close to someone or a conversation or really loud background noise, it can interfere with it. But 99% of the time, it's perfectly fine. And it's unlikely, as you said, that someone running past saying something, it would actually trigger it, but it can. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Blow up. No. I'm going to skip this because we're running out of time. And when I tested it before, it kind of worked. And I'll talk a little bit about, actually, sorry, there's a hand somewhere. Yes? Could you train it to an individual voice? Not with the standard SDK. There might be some way. You know, you can do it with Hey Cortana. Shouldn't say it too loud. Hey Cortana, you can actually train it to just your voice, but I'm not sure that works in here. Hey Cortana, for example, works on the HoloLens as well. Cortana's fully integrated. Yes?
So just going a bit back to the gestures and
Sure.
scanning to start. A lot of the scenarios I've seen it used in are particularly high light situations. So, for example, if you found an application, real world application such as cinema or something that was a lot darker, how does that influence the scanning and the messages? Like, what kind of light conditions can the HoloLens reliably work up to?
Yeah, I'm glad you summarized the question at the end. What kind of light conditions can the HoloLens actually work under? Not just with gestures, I guess, but in general.
In general, yeah.
Really bright sunlight doesn't work because the infrared just can't pick it up. Darker rooms, if it's really dark, it kind of not works, but it works much better in darker conditions than lighter conditions just because of the infrared, the way that it picks it up. Just like your Kinect. If you ever tried using an Xbox in full sunlight, sometimes the Kinect just goes, ooh, just goes all over the place because there's so much infrared input that comes in. Actually, I might just skip this because I'm kind of running out of time. All I wanted to show was just with the Astro Man. Actually, we showed it already, right? The voice commands of exploding the guy and whatnot. But if you saw Rocky's session, that should be something on that as well. This, to me, is more important. Anyone knows how spatial audio works? Yes. Go for it. Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. It's very, very good. Very good description. So, but it kind of looks like that as well, right? What you described, so the sound that, if its sound comes, like when I'm talking to you now, you hear it from the speaker. And now there's speakers on both sides, so you kind of hear it like you're hearing it from me, but you probably aren't in the back. But with holograms as well, you hear the sound from the hologram. It's spatially located. And then uses something called head-related transfer function, which apparently is this. I have no freaking clue. Because the cool thing is that Microsoft does all that for you. You don't have to worry about any of that. It is what's called a binaural function, meaning it goes to both ears. And on the device, those red things on the bottom here is two speakers on either side. And those are what mimics real-world sound. And it is, again, really, really accurate. And it's, again, so simple to use. Because what you do is that you attach an audio object either to the element or you trigger it through code, set a few properties. That's it. Which is why I want to talk about this. Because, again, the coding is not hard, but the design of it is really, really tricky. There are 4 or 5 different things that you want to achieve with audio in the HoloLens. One's grounding. You need to understand where elements are, as in grounding them to a position. That's what spatial audio does. So if I have someone playing on a virtual piano over there, the grounding of that sound is that I can hear the piano over there. It doesn't matter where my head turns, it'll always appear as though it's from that position. So it's grounding the object to an exact position in the spatial 3D grid. User attention, because I don't know if you've tried HoloLens yet, but the viewport is about that big, right? It's not very big, and you lose track of holograms real easy. So you can get the user's attention by having sound coming from a hologram, so your user turns their head. So that's another design goal for HoloLens. Immersion, as we would expect, it makes it much more natural, much more real. And also that means that you should think about your interaction design, because you want natural sounds, right? If you have an eagle, make it sound like a freaking eagle, okay? That's the whole idea with this mixed reality, is that you enhance the physical world with digital assets. So if the eagle suddenly sounds like a robot, it becomes unbelievable or non-believable, right? A few tips on that. There's something called gaze mixing, which is highlighting objects, particularly when out of view. So that's what we said with getting the user's attention. You can use visual clues to guide users, essentially. Audio haptics. So if you interact with something, have a sound that says, hey, you did the interaction. So that the user feels, I clicked on something, and it went click, or it went zoom, or whatever it does, right? And yeah, immersion. Ambient sounds are good, but they can also be a real pain, because they can be too loud, they can be too often, they can be too repetitive. Something like wind in trees is good, because that gives you a natural feeling, but the background music to a game, for example, can be, yeah, very, very annoying. Yes?
You mentioned from the view you have up to 5 meters.
Mm-hmm.
Does it apply to all users, or the audio can be further?
You have 5 meters from the device. So that's where it maps the space. So I'll show you that, yeah, in about 5 minutes, how that works.
But you can make holograms further than that away?
Yeah, absolutely. That's just the spatial mapping. Yep. Speaking of which, spatial mapping that's the number one reason that HoloLens works the way it does. It is so incredibly important to get right. So the way spatial mapping works is that it creates with the infrared cameras, the environmental cameras that are on the front of the device, it creates a 3D grid of your environment. And it kind of looks like this. It's all polygons in more or less detail. And you can see it's pretty obvious that's a couch, right? It becomes reasonably obvious what it is. Those are the 4 main reasons, or 4 aims of spatial mapping. Placement, so you can place things on a wall, on the floor, on a chair. Occlusion, which means just you can hide holograms. That makes it really, really, really real, because you can have holograms hiding behind things, behind your couch, behind your furniture in general. Physics, holograms should react to things that are in your natural environment. So if I throw a ball that way, a virtual ball, it should hit the chair, right? It shouldn't go through the chair. The physics of the room is important in how it relates to the digital assets that you have. And then navigation. A good example is that Young Conquer game, because he navigates your physical space, even though he's a digital asset. He runs around and jumps on your furniture and goes underneath your tables and goes out through the door. And that means that the navigation part of it is based on what the spatial mapping of the room is. If that was off, well, you might walk through your couch, right? It'd look weird. But I'll show you this first. And I'll get to I know you want to see the device working, so we'll get to that, don't worry. So here's our Astroman thing. I've just hit the start key, and it goes out. So that's the bloom, effectively, in the emulator. I've hit the start key. If I hit it again, it comes up with a start menu. It looks like Windows 10, because it is. HoloLens runs Windows 10. On the right here, let me just get rid of this. Whee! There we go. So on the right, I have a few different tools here, right? One of them is at the bottom here. I'll start at the bottom. There's more. Let me just move this a little bit. There's more tooling that you can use. And I do recommend using this when you're testing things. And this is the body and the head and the hands position. So when I move around in the emulator, you see that all changes. If I tilt my head, that shows you the tilting of the head as well, the head roll. Because it's important, because you can do that in real life. And you can make it bigger. If it was able to go more than 100%, I would, but it doesn't. You have keyboard and mouse input, so you don't have to, if you're entering things like Wi-Fi passwords, you don't have to go tap on a keyboard, tap, tap. You can actually use your keyboard, which is very handy. And there's a option to have Bluetooth keyboards and Bluetooth elements attached to the HoloLens as well. But the most important thing is this device portal. So this, and I'll show you for the real device in just a second, the device portal for the HoloLens is where you get all of your data out. I'll get to 3D view in a minute because I want to do that on the real device. But you have stuff like performance tracing. You can see what's running on it on the physical device. And this is the emulator, but it still acts like a physical device in that sense, right? System performance, so the system on chip, the power usage. This is really, really important because the battery life is 2 to 3 hours. So if you suddenly is sucking tons of power, that means you get maybe half an hour, and then people go, oh, shit. And you need to kind of, more so than with any other device, I'd say, you need to bear that in mind. Frame rate on the emulator is a little bit less. It says about 49. It should be 60 always. If you get less than 60 is when you start having people being motion sick and throwing up in the helmet, and that is not pretty. GPU, if you want interested in that, I/O network, and then down here is the memory, and that to me is interesting. Look at that. How interesting is that? There we go. It's got 2 gigs of memory, and I've never seen it using more than 1.2, 1.3. And I'm quite impressed by that, to be honest, because I've run all sorts of stuff on it, all sorts on the actual device. So it seems like 2 gig is enough. It is a 32-bit device, so you couldn't really use more than 4 anyway. You also have system tooling, I guess, in here. You can sideload apps. So if you have someone else's app, you can sideload that onto the emulator or the physical device. Oh, come on, stop that. Crash dumps. Yep. So the question is, can you use the Windows Store on the emulator to install apps? Yeah, absolutely. Yep. You just got to log in with your account, your MS account, of course. But yeah, it works exactly like that. The only things that it doesn't do is battery, obviously, because unless your laptop runs out of battery. Sometimes Wi-Fi is a little bit, because it's Hyper-V, it uses its own virtual adapter to the Wi-Fi you have or the network connection you have, and sometimes the testing of that just goes a bit iffy. File Explorer, logging, simulation, just the standard stuff that you want to have as a developer. You want to be able to use logging frameworks and figure out what's going on. But let me just go to this, and then we'll see, hopefully, I'm on the right network. Yes. So now this thing is connected through my phone, and my laptop's connected to my phone, and when this starts up, and I get network connection. Yep. I should now be able to go click on that, and then it goes black again. Come on. Ignore. Wow. You guys are really patient. Come on. There we go. And I can do a live stream, right? Now, this does not give a particular accurate representation of what it looks like looking through it, but it does give you a little bit of an idea. Now, the lag is because everything goes through my phone, right? So I see this fully smooth. Oh, come on. Yep. I can do a dance. Wait. There we go. Okay, and has that frozen? It's the beautiful thing about developer tools. Yep, so I'll just fire it up again. Okay. Come on, there we go. So you can kind of get an idea for it, right? So, it's the best bit. I've got Mr. Technical Person up here. Thank you, man. And it frozen again. Yeah. Sometimes this doesn't quite work as fluidly as I would like. Because it's all, okay, we'll just go. Camera again. Back to live stream. I'll get there. Go. No? Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, I'll try. So, wow, that's really laggy. That's. I don't know why it's that laggy. This is the beautiful thing about live demos. Okay. In any case, what I'm doing is that I'm going to tap on everything, which forces the spatial mapping. Do that to get rid of the start menu. I'm just going to try and see if I can get this going again, because it is a little bit more interesting if you can actually see what I'm doing. It's one of the reasons. Ooh. Did that just completely die? Okay. One of the reasons that Microsoft doesn't actually recommend you doing this live. So if I tap on the floor here, you should be able to see. No? Oh, gosh. Yeah, this is not working well. Okay, I'm tapping and I'm forcing the... Oh, that just died now. And that died too. Wow, we're having a good day today. How awesome is HoloLens? Woo!
You should have bought the one with the warranty.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why the Wi-Fi is that bad, because it goes directly through my phone hotspot. Okay, I'm just going to tap everywhere here, which was my intention. And that forces the mapping of the room, right? So it forces everything to be spatially mapped. And then if I go into the developer portal of the device instead, which is 185. Hang on, that's not right. Yeah, I know. 137. Okay. And it goes, are you sure? Yes. Okay. I'll log in. Okay, so here's the real device. This is a developer portal, right? I can now go to the 3D view, which gives me this plane, essentially. Click. Of, well, come on. It's interesting, when I tested this, 2 hours ago, in a different room, it was brilliant, promise you. The 3D view is a way of showing where the user is in 3D space. Wow, this is really not working. There we go. You can see I'm moving my head, so that's in real time, which does work for some reason. I can zoom in here, and I can see as I move, I can also go up above. But the really cool thing is I can click on this update button, and it'll draw what I've mapped. All right? Just give it a sec, just to draw it. So there's the podium. There's some people in the front row. There's the floor. So this is essentially downloading the 3D model from the device, right? Sorry? So you can see the polygon count as well. It's not super accurate, but you can definitely see those are people. You can see this is some sort of podium or something. But you can also see if I move here, the thing will actually move with me. Right, so it's fully live 3D, and I'm looking at this people here. There's a few things you can do with this. You can, for example, have the first-person view, if that's important. So you can see what I'm looking at. There's the laptops and whatnot. And if I were to map the space again, it wouldn't update. I have to click update on the button there. So it doesn't continually download stuff from the device. That does make people usually a little bit seasick.
So that is the web server and the HoloLens, because you're hooked into that IP address.
Yeah, it'd be iOS Express or something, I would imagine. I actually don't know exactly what it is. Yes, sir.
So the emulator, can you use something like Connect to do this?
Not off the bat, but there is a guy in Florida that has built a Connect SDK that's on GitHub. And I think it might become part of the not Holo Toolkit, Holo Tools. There's a bunch of tools that don't run anything on the HoloLens, but are helping you developing. So that's the really cool. The really cool thing is you can save this, right? You can save your spatial mapping, and I don't know if you saw it, .obj type file, and you can then load that onto emulators. So you could map your whole development environment and then load that so everybody has the same environment. Right. Okay. Just for fun and giggles, because that kind of worked a little bit. Okay. Well, we have backup. Because you can do capture. Oh, come on. And you can then do a much lower resolution live preview. It's always a plan B. Or not. I don't think it's going to work. I apologize for that. But if you do get a chance to try the HoloLenses out in the expo hall, please do. The other thing that's a bit annoying with this is that you do look like an idiot. There's no way around it. Hopefully, future generations will be a bit more lightweight. Okay. Make sure I've got everything. Any questions for that? Even though that was pretty much a demo fail, but you kind of got the idea. The developer portal will be your friend because all the performance stuff, all the 3D modeling, everything goes through that portal, so you can visualize it. Yes?
I remember reading about the dev kit.
Mm-hmm.
It was only available in North America. Is there an ETA or time that we get to see it in Australia?
Now.
Purchase it? Oh, it is now.
Yeah. So you can currently, it's US, Canada, which it was initially. Let's just switch over to the other one. I think that was it for that. Yeah. US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Germany, France, I think, maybe. There's about 7 or 8 countries. Japan just came on, and China's been announced. So I'm sure they're rolling out more and more and more countries. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you identify the human using
How do you identify the human?
the device? Picking up your lens and looking at your email. So how do you actually authenticate the person that's using the device?
How do you authenticate the person using the device? You can have a logon on it, just like any other Windows 10 device, so you have to log into it. But that's probably about the only thing you can do. There's no fingerprint recognition or iris scanning or anything like that. NFC. I don't know. Anyone knows? No, it doesn't. No, I don't think so. It's Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. But I don't think it's NFC. No. All right, we've got 12 minutes to go. And I've still got 4 or 5 cards to go. Testing. Has anyone ever thought about testing HoloLens SAPs? No? Yeah, I hadn't either until I kind of looked into it. Was there a hand down there? Yeah. So the question is there a lower price coming? Don't know. I don't work for Microsoft. They tell me nothing. Rocky, that was here yesterday, would be the best person to ask on Twitter or whatever. He's like the official voice of HoloLens in Australia, so I just don't know. There's other VR devices coming for the Windows holographic framework, like from Lenovo and HP and Dell and all those, and they've been announced at about $300-400, but it's not a HoloLens. So yes.
I think yesterday was mentioned, and you mentioned today, there's a small kind of gap in your peripheral vision where there's no lens, as you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Small gap. Well, it's much more than a small gap.
It's much more.
Yeah, it's what you saw there, the brief moments it did work, is much more than I see through the lens, because it uses the webcam to overlay the holograms.
So when you've got holograms kind of presented,
Mm-hmm.
do you notice them kind of disappearing, momentarily from your line of sight on the sides? And is that
Yes.
kind of confusing a little bit? Or is it
No, 15, 20 minutes, and you're fine. So the question is, does it become annoying, confusing, whatever, that you can't see the holograms if you move your head? You got to move your head a lot to kind of get the full experience. But it's not. Initially, yeah, it is annoying, but you kind of quickly get over it. So, yes.
So one of the big pushes is the cognitive services. Is
Uh-huh.
that sort of done more AR overlays, cognitive services on things in your field of view?
So has there been more AR? I don't know.
Looking at you and recognising you, giving you stats, showing you tweets,
Oh, right.
around you, booming information around you.
Not that I know of, but I'll share that on Twitter. There's a really good video of how bloody annoying that can be. Like it's an art student that's gone overboard with it. But no, not that I know of. Anyway, I just want to get through this and we can do a few more questions. So testing holograms is, It's kind of weird and not easy because you do need a physical device to some extent. This is the matrix that Microsoft has put out saying these are the 4 categories that you need to use. So there's light, sound, user movement, and physical movement. A physical environment are the main categories that you need to test for, right? If you want to, there's the URL if you want to go and have a read through what all of these are. Brightness, color, dynamic highlighting, hologram lighting. Lighting especially is a bit weird because in Unity you can put light on things so they get lit from a certain angle, right? But if you have a lamp over here, that doesn't interact with it. So you want to make sure that your lighting is not completely overpowering because it can become a bit unnatural. Color, you try different colors in the room. Will it work if you have a blue light? If you have a particular bright light that is white or yellow? Because those things can affect how holograms are shown. Sound, ambient noise, ambient conversation, spatial. We kind of talked about this before, but make sure you test for it anyway. Ambient noise is essentially just go to a cafe and use it and have people laugh at you. Something like that, just so you get a sense for how people could use it in for real when it gets out. User movement, you don't know what users are going to do. They'll move, they'll dance, they'll do all sorts. Try and think of as many scenarios as you can in how people would move when they use your app. And then physical environment. Because the spatial mapping sometimes is a little bit off, a little bit clunky, something like curved walls can be really interesting, or arched doorways. Some of those sort of not square features of rooms and buildings are worth testing for, just to see how your app behaves. Okay. I wanted to show you something quickly, if I can get this to work now. Something called perception simulation, which is apparently reasonably new, a couple of months old or something. And it's a way of simulating user movement. So you can do the same scenarios, kind of like unit testing. You can do the exact same movements every single time for a scenario. So that's, again, I'll show you. There's a website. You just search for perception simulation HoloLens, and it'll come up. But let me just show you how that works real quick. Hopefully. Hey. So I'm just using the thing that they have on the website. Just make sure I got the right IP. Actually, that's the easiest way to find your IP is go to settings. And then you wait. Okay, that's not going to work. Don't know why that. I'm guessing this is 206, isn't it? So you put in your IP there for the emulator in the script, and you don't give it any credentials because you don't have to. And then you have all these different API calls which are exactly like what you could do as a human. So in here you have human, right hand, perform gesture, home. So that's the blue, right? Perform gesture, home again. So again, that's, if you're in an app, it exits it, and then it starts up the start menu. Or it shows the start menu. You can rotate your head. You can press finger, press release, so that's a tap, right? And this is just a sample script that Microsoft provided, but you can do pretty much anything that a human would do in terms of tapping and moving and gestures. So this is why it's perception. It's the perceived movement of the user. So all I have to do now, if I got the IP right, I think I got it right. Too many adapters. Oh no, it's 91, isn't it? You start that up. This just shows a console app. Runs a console app, which is there. Oh, come on. Yeah, I didn't get the IP right. Demos are going well, aren't they? But you get the idea. So when I get the IP right, it'll shoot these commands directly to the emulator as if a person had done it. And it works with a physical device as well. So it'll override whatever you're doing and feed it directly into the gesture recognition and the movement recognition, all that stuff on the SDK of the emulator or the real device. So that means you can do the exact same action every single time. So it is kind of like unit testing, right? And it's really quite easy to set up. And there is, on the website, they have, in here, perception simulation. It's all documented what you can do. So you got, rotations and frustum, don't know what that is. But you can simulate absolutely everything that you would do as a human, which is really quite neat. Yeah. Any questions on that, even though that kind of worked? Yeah? Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to increase or decrease the polygon count?
Yes, you can. Yeah. So, but that's up to you in your app. Say I want better spatial mapping or not, and it does have a performance hit on both battery and CPU, of course. But you can. Yeah. Yes. Yes, you can use either hand for the HoloLens. Yeah. Kinda and not. There is some scenarios where you can use both hands, but it's not. It can't pick it up from the core framework. You have to do something yourself. But there has been tests with using two hands, but it's not meant for it right now. Okay, let's switch back here. That was that. That's me. They give me stickers. Says MVP on them. I have just built a course on Pluralsight. Where is it? There it is. On everything that Rocky went through yesterday, and the testing part of this talk as well. So if you are interested in knowing more about how to develop for HoloLens, either come talk to me, ping me on Twitter, or find me. I'm here all day today. Or go watch that if you want. And there are, I believe, free trial cards at the Pluralsight stand. Otherwise, I should have had some by now, but they weren't ready. But I can give you some as well. So that says Q&A, but we've kind of done that throughout the talk. Don't forget to continue learning path. Do the party tonight. I have to show you these. And collect your wristband for it. Thank you very much.